Evening, folks. I don't know if this is going to get all the way through in one piece, but we're going to try. It might be if this ends up being a two-parter before. Little bit's up here with me, and she's playing, not quite ready for bed yet, so we'll see. I also have a full tank, so I'm good to go. We're going to be in Genesis 14 tonight, so I hope you guys have time to jump on and join me tonight. It's interesting tonight, not really profound necessarily. Hey Mark, welcome aboard. But just a little bit of interesting history here. This chapter for some reason has always been kind of cool to me. Just one that I never studied as a kid. You know, you get into Bible class and you study certain stories and they get repeated, and there's ones that are kind of okay for kids, and then there's ones that aren't. And 14 is more about war and stuff, and so it tends to get left out. But then when you read about it, you start to put some things together and get an idea of what was going on back at that time. So, again, excuse me, I do not have coronavirus. Just have a dry throat from talking all day today. Had an evaluation today. It was cool. He came into the rowdiest class I have, and had one kid thought it was fun to crack jokes every time I said anything, and then I had two kids that couldn't stay awake. So it went awesome. Such is my job, I guess. Anyway, let's get into Genesis chapter 14 and verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim. The King James says nations, but Goim is what the ESV uses. That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the vale of Sidon, which is the Salt Sea. So, the Vale of Sidon, the Salt Sea, this is the Dead Sea, I'm guessing, what we call the Dead Sea today. I don't have any indication otherwise, but that would make sense to me. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtoreth Karnaim, and the Zuzams in Ham, and the Emmons in Shaveh Kiriathaim. Now, throwing a bunch of words out here real quick, but I want to give a little bit of background on some of this. First of all, Chedorlaomer is just fun to say. I've always loved saying that name. I don't know why. Wouldn't name my kid that, but it's still fun to say. But first of all, Ashtaroth is a male form of Ashtoreth, which was a pagan god. She was the pagan god of fertility and war, so Ashtaroth is a god of war as well. But here, Ashtaroth is a place, the Ashtaroth Karnaim. A lot of places are named after gods and whatnot, so this isn't necessarily talking about the god directly, the pagan god directly. But I really want to focus in on this idea of the Rephaims. The Rephaims were giants. Now here's our first mention of giants post-flood. And again, I would ask, if the giants were all these quote-unquote Nephilim, half-angel creatures that interbred with wicked men, so that there were giants before the flood, and we're not just talking about mankind in general, then how did they survive the flood? Because everything got wiped out. Hey Arthur, thank you for joining us tonight. We're in right now Genesis 14 verse 5. So again, I will contend with you that all of mankind was giants in those days. It was in our genetics. It was not because somehow we bred with angels, which are spiritual beings anyway. They're not physical beings. The idea that two different kinds of creatures, not just two different kinds in the biological sense, but two different kinds in the material sense, like angels are spirit beings, whereas humans are physical beings as well as spiritual beings, and the reproduction is a biological thing. Of course, God can do it. God created us. So the virgin birth of Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit, that's possible because God is God. But angels crossbreeding, no, that's nonsense. But here we have giants. The Rephaims were giants, and they lived after the flood, and they were in this plains area around Sodom and Gomorrah. And then the Zuzims in Ham, that's the son of Noah, and so they named a location after him. So all of this fighting is going on because they rebelled against Chedorlaomer. Now you have all of these towns that are named, all these cities that are named. At this point in history, most everything that you read about is a city-state. That's the level of government that we're talking about. But here you had Chedorlaomer was trying to kind of be an over-king, if you will. You had all these kings of these city-states, but they had all kind of, they had a treaty with him, or they had an agreement or a pact with him, and he kind of led them for 12 years. And then the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and 3 other city-states rebelled against him. And so that's the history of this area. So verse 6, and the Horites and their Mount Seir unto Elparan, which is by the wilderness, and they returned and came to Emishpat, which is Kadesh. So Moses is giving a couple of names here, probably a historical name and probably a more local modern name in the time of the Israelites as they're wandering. Chris, give me a little loud, please. Thank you. It smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. And we'll read about the Amalekites and the Amorites from time to time. They don't go away just immediately, but there was war. That the smote all of the country doesn't mean they wiped them out. It just means that they attacked them. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them in the Vale of Siddim. So those are the 5 kings that rebelled against Chedorlaomer, and they are fighting in the valley or the Vale of Siddim, and that is, as my understanding is next to the Dead Sea. Verse 9. With Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of, again, the King James says king of nations. I'm not sure about the original language there, why there's a difference, but it's Goim, Goiim. But this guy, Tidal, was the king of Goim, or king of nations. Maybe that was just a pompous title that he gave himself. And Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. So Chedorlaomer, Tidal, Amraphel, and Arioch. Now remember, Shinar is Babel. So these guys are the descendants of Nimrod. And then you have the other 3 kings that are still kind of in this pact with Chedorlaomer, and they're going against the 5 kings, including Sodom and Gomorrah, that rebelled. Verse 10, and the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. That sounds fun. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountains. So the 5 kings lose. So this guy, Chedorlaomer, probably ruled for a reason. He was probably by far the most powerful of all of these. And so even though there were only 4 of them, they were way more powerful. So the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and died. And everybody else that was left fled to the mountains, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. So you have these 4 kings, they go into Sodom and Gomorrah and they take all the good stuff. They plunder the cities because all of the 2 kings are dead, and then all of the armies are fled into the mountains. So Sodom and Gomorrah are just kind of open. So they go in and they take all their stuff. Verse 12, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, his nephew, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So these 4 kings, they come in and they take not only all the good stuff of Sodom and Gomorrah, but they also take Lot captive. And by this time, Lot has moved into Sodom. And so he loses his goods, and they get out of there. Excuse me. Verse 13, and there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew. What is a Hebrew? First time we see this. What is a Hebrew? Hebrew is a descendant of Eber. So they call him Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre. Hey, Stephen, welcome aboard. We're in verse 13 of Genesis 14. For he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So you have this guy is escaped from this war, and he dwells in the plain of Mamre, and he's the brother of Eshcol, brother of Aner, and these guys were in league with Abram. So Abram has made his own allies. So Abram here, when Abram heard that his brother was, and that word brother there is kinsman, kind of like we have brothers in arms, or we would say our brothers in the church, or something along those lines. They're not obviously just got finished saying Abram's brother's son. That's the more specific term of nephew. But here Abram heard that his kinsman was taken captive, even though the King James says brother. And you got to kind of watch that. There's some words that in the King James they get translated as one thing because it's King James. It's a little bit archaic modern English, but they don't actually mean like you get into Daniel. We know that Nebuchadnezzar had offspring, and we end up having Belshazzar as the king right before the Medo-Persian nation comes in, and it says that Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but he's not. He's actually the grandson, and so that word son there is a more descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. They just don't translate it that way into the English. So just be careful of that when you're reading through this on your own. Really truly understand contextually what these words mean. So verse 14, and when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318. So he's going to take 318 men and go after Lot and rescue him, and pursued them unto Dan. And here's an interesting thing, and this is throwing a lot of people off. Number one, Moses is writing this. He's writing it in the wilderness. The promised land has not been settled at the time of this writing. So the land that is eventually... Oh yeah, I critique the King James all the time. I use the King James so much because I know where the flaws are, if that makes sense. So Moses is writing this to the 12 tribes that are wandering in this wilderness before they've settled the promised land. So Dan, the tribe of Dan, has not chosen where it wants to be yet. And so this cannot be talking about that area, because there's no way chronologically that Moses or the Israelites would have known what that referred to. But if you look at the word Dan, Dan is a Hebrew word that just means a judge. And so if there is another place that would translate as a judge or the judge, then it would be the word Dan in Hebrew, without necessarily having to be the land of Dan, the tribal land of Dan. A lot of people see this and they try to say that, well, this is indication that this was written later, that Moses didn't really write this. And, you get all these guys in here that just, they want to tear the Bible apart. They want to break down its inspiration and say it was just written by man. There's no God inspiration, and they'll point to this. But every single argument that they make is typically a weak argument, one that does not necessarily have to lead to the conclusions that they draw. One of them is this word Dan, that does not have to be the land of Dan after they settle in the Promised Land. So I just wanted to bring that up while we were here. Verse 15, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them. So he's only got 318. He's going against 4 city-states. So he's got 318 men. And so they fight tactically. They fight guerrilla warfare. They divide themselves against the 4 kings, he and his servants, by night, and he kills them, and then pursued some of them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and he also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. So all of the things that Chedorlaomer and these guys had taken out of Sodom, he brings back. And the king of Sodom, so this is a new king. Remember, the old king got killed. The new king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shabba, which is the king's dale. So Sodom comes, the king of Sodom comes out to meet him. And then we have this interesting little kind of aside that happens. Melchizedek, king of Salem. Now, Salem is a word that means peace. It's kind of like shalom. And Melchizedek is a guy that gets mentioned in the New Testament. And one of the things that's said about Melchizedek is that he had no mother or father. And it is believed that Melchizedek is said to have no mother or father because he was one of those that's on the boat, the ark, that came across. It's not Noah. And if you look at the timelines of the people that survived, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Japheth is still alive at this time period. And so scholars, including myself, and I'm not making this as a dogmatic claim, I'm not making this as an absolute claim, but I think there is a strong implication here, if not airtight, that Melchizedek is Japheth, because without a mother and father, in terms of coming across from the flood, what other meaning could we give to a man? And it says that Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. So you have a king of Salem, who is a priest of the Most High God. And the reason that's important is because this man is both king and priest of God. He's a servant of God. He's the king and he's a priest. And so when we get into the New Testament, when we get into the book of Hebrews, and it talks about Christ being after the order of Melchizedek, that word order isn't like a knightly order or some kind of an organized structure, like we would talk about the order of the Knights, or the order of the Templars, or the order of the Masons, or the order of this or the order of that. We have all of these ideas in our head that we bring to the Bible, but in saying that Jesus is after the order of Melchizedek, that means he was like him. And he was like him in that Jesus was both king and high priest. Jesus, when he ascended into heaven, he sat down on the throne of David. He became our king. He is the king of the kingdom, which is the church. He is the high priest at the same time, just as was prophesied. In Zechariah, it says that when he sat on his throne, he would be priest on his throne. It all happened at the same time. That's what Hebrews talks about. And so that's what it means for him to be after the order of Melchizedek. He's like Melchizedek in that he is both king and priest. So it'll probably be a very long time before I actually get to Hebrews, so I thought I'd mention that now. So, and he, that is Melchizedek, blessed him, that is Abram, and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. So he's saying, Abram, you serve the Most High God, who possesses heaven and earth. The creator of the heaven and the earth is one translation. Let's see. Yeah, the possessor or the creator. The word there can mean either one of those. The one who controls the heaven and earth, in the sense of what we think of in Genesis chapter 1. So blessed be Abraham of the Most High God. Melchizedek recognizes Abram as a fellow servant of the Most High God. And blessed be the Most High God, which has delivered your enemies into your hand, and he gave him tithes of all. So, interesting here. Melchizedek blesses Abram, says, blessed be Abram, blessed be the Most High God, acknowledges that God gave Abram the victory. Hey, Donnie, that's my cousin. Glad to see you on here. We're studying Genesis 14, and we're down in verse 20. And I wanted to pull up something here real quick. If I could spell. Hello. Do something. Let's do it that way. There we go. No. All right, so Hebrews 5, 6, and 7 is where we read about Melchizedek, and it says that Hebrews 5, 6, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. That's talking about Christ. And then, so I want to talk about Hebrews 7, 1. And then it says, because Genesis 14 isn't actually clear, and it says that at the very end of verse 20, and he gave him tithes of all. And so reading this as a kid, I had always thought that Melchizedek gave tithes to Abram, making Abram richer. But if you read in Hebrews 7:1 says, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all. So Abraham gives, the Blue Devils, this was my old high school in Florida, Donnie, that I was teaching at for the last 6 or so years before I moved here to Tennessee. So this is not a college ball thing. This is you can see the clay right here. So but anyway, it's Abraham that pays the 10th or the tithe to Salem, which makes sense. You know, you look back into the Old Testament, the tithes were generally given to the priests to be counted towards what was given to God. They gave a 10th part of everything. Here, not necessarily by command, but just by choice. Abraham is, I still love you too, man. They gave a 10th to Melchizedek by choice, just because Melchizedek is a priest and he is blessing Abram, and he is they worship the same God and whatnot. So yes, the Bible is always and forever its own best interpreter. We don't need other men to do it for us. We could sit down and we could study it all for ourselves. There you go. So, yep, Hebrews cleared it right up. So my wife is messaging me. Not to bring Karis down for sure, man. It's jealous and she's not trying to. Okay. Karis, Mom says it's time for bed. You need to head on down. You can take that box with you if you want, but it's time to go to bed, okay? Hey, if you want to stay up with me tomorrow, you need to go downstairs now. No, you've got plenty. Maybe Mom will open it if you want to take that down there. Okay, love you. Sweet dreams. Night night. I'll be done here in a second, okay? All right. So, verse 21. And the king of Sodom, this is again the new king because the old one's dead, The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the persons and take the goods to yourself." In other words, give me back my citizens that were captured, but you can have the goods because you did a great thing for us. You take all the citizens out of a city state, you devastate the city state. They don't have any means of production. You basically wiped out the city state. But by bringing back the people, the city state would survive, even if Abraham took all of the goods that had been plundered. But Abraham said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted up my hand unto Jehovah, the Most High God, the creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread, even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich." So Abraham said, I lifted my hand. He kind of took an oath to Jehovah that he personally would not take anything. Hey, Heather, Karis is on her way, by the way, and I'm about to wrap up. I got like 3 more verses, so I'll probably be down shortly myself. But he takes an oath and he says, I'm not going to take anything from the king of Sodom or from any of these guys, because I don't want them to say that they're the ones that made Abram rich. He had his own personal wealth, and he was trusting in God. Now, to take this a little bit deeper, Moses is setting up an example for the Israelites that they don't follow. Because if you look throughout the Israelite history, God says, I'll provide for you. And he does. He provides for them more than they could ever need. But they want to be so much like the nations around them that they begin to trust in those other nations for their wealth. The opposite of what Abraham does here. Abraham said, I'm going to trust God for my wealth. And so Moses is trying to give an example here, and the Israelites just didn't get it. So, cool. So verse 24, he says, save only that which the young men have eaten. So his army, his 318, had eaten some food while they were out campaigning. And the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. So Abram says, look, I personally am not going to take anything, but these are my confederates. Remember, these 3 men are not part of Abram's immediate group. They're allies of his that dwell near him, kind of like the 5 kings and the 4 kings. So Abraham says, look, I'm not speaking for them. Thank you, Donnie. Abram says, look, I'm not speaking for them, I'm just speaking for me. They have a right to whatever gifts you want to give them. Go ahead and give it to them, but I'm not taking anything because I don't want you to say that you're the one that made me rich. So and so they played the harlot. That's exactly true. Donnie, definitely. I would love to see you guys soon. We might be trying to come in the summer. I don't know. I haven't been able to plan that far ahead. So many things are changing so rapidly for me right now. That long-term plans are kind of difficult, but I would love to see you guys again. It has been too long. We are considering possibly the reunion, so we'll have to see. But anyway, that's Genesis 14. It's not like too intense, but there's some good stuff here, and there's definitely some things that need to be understood. Romans 15:4 says that the Bible, the things that were written aforetime are written for our learning. This is one of those things. Hey, Allison, you're catching us at the tail end here, but this is one of those things to understand Melchizedek. This is where we start to understand him, who is spoken of in the book of Hebrews, and then we also understand a little bit more about Abram, and we understand a little bit about the history of what's going on in this time period and what things were like. Even Egypt at this time is barely more than a city-state, and it's probably owing to their nearness to the Nile. So, thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Stephen. But as always, if you have questions or you want to talk a little bit more about what we covered tonight, leave some comments. I will always respond sooner or later. I'll get to it. But again, tomorrow night, I am not going to be on a live because I will be participating I will be watching my friends do their live. They're doing, they're if I remember correctly, they were doing something about the worship of Mary. If that's not correct, they can correct me. But and so I'm going to watch that, and I'll be participating in the comments there, which I usually do on Wednesday night. So I won't be going tomorrow, but on Thursday I will continue on with Genesis 15, maybe 16. So yeah, around the time of the pyramids. So we're Egypt is probably one of the very first early true kingdoms that is beyond just being a city state. And with the Israelites there, with that slave labor, a whole nation of slave labor, that probably helped quite a bit too. So, but that's all I got for tonight. And thank you guys for joining me, and we will see you next time.